So pleased to have this chance to welcome you to our second panel discussion and webinar for the Churchill Borough C1 District Planning and Visioning Project. My name is Elaine Kramer, and I am a community planner with Pashik MTR, which is a consulting firm. And I'm here with Jim Pashik, who is our firm's founding partner, and my colleagues Heather Fuller and Keely McDonald, as well as Tess DeYoung, who is from Connect. That's the Congress of Neighboring Communities here in the Pittsburgh region. I'm so thrilled to welcome you all to the webinar, and I want to share the screen and start showing you some cool stuff. So you should be able to see me, see us, hear me, and take in some information here on this slide. This is an informational slide we'll keep up just while people are getting settled in. And we wanted to have this up while we welcomed you again, all of you residents, and welcome also to the panelists, whom we'll introduce in a moment. We appreciate your time tonight and your interest in this project. This is a workshop or panel discussion about connectivity. And we will be showing you, as you look at this slide, you can start to see the agenda, but we'll talk about that again in just a second. So we're here tonight to talk about connectivity related to the C1 district. And I'm showing you the zoning map because first I wanted to give you just a brief introduction to this project. Churchill Borough decided to undertake a community visioning project regarding the future of its C1 district. This is the borough zoning map, and R stands for residential and C stands for commercial. And so you can see this area right here is the C1 Commercial 1 zoning district. And this is the part of the borough that many local residents will know as the former Westinghouse R&D site. And this visioning project is asking residents of Churchill what you would like to see happen there in the future. The visioning project is an outgrowth of Churchill's 10-year comprehensive plan. So back in 2016 and 2017, Churchill, Monroeville, and Wilkins began developing a joint comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2018. And one recommendation was for Churchill to proactively plan what could happen in this large part of the community right here, which has had little use for many, many years now. So that comprehensive plan begat this visioning initiative. So I want to talk for just a minute about how tonight's webinar fits in with that planning and visioning project overall. This is a 6-part webinar series. This one that we're on right now is the second of the 6. And these are opportunities for residents to listen to panel discussion and ask questions of people with expertise in various topics. And the panel discussions and webinars are all designed to help residents learn more about the possibilities of new development at the C1 district and become engaged in the visioning process. So besides this, as many of you know, there is a community questionnaire that you can fill out either online or on paper. And you can go to churchillborough.com or call the borough office to learn more. About this webinar, here are some logistics. It's being recorded for later viewing. And all 6 webinar recordings will be posted on the borough website, churchillborough.com. And this agenda shows how we will divide up the time in the webinar. At any point, in this first part of the webinar, you can submit a question And to do that, you would hover your cursor at the top or bottom of the Zoom screen until you see this toolbar, the black bar you see in the screen here. And then you can click on the Q&A button and write and then submit your question. And we will get to as many of those as we can during that Q&A period. All the questions also will be saved for our project steering committee to review as well. We wanted to mention that we've taken precautions to prevent Zoom bombing, which is an inappropriate interruption of a Zoom meeting. In the unlikely event that this occurs, we will end the meeting immediately. And so if you see that eyeball thingy, that's because we've made the decision to terminate the webinar. So though we feel like we should take these precautions, we're actually expecting and looking forward to a really interesting webinar, just like we had in the last hour and a half. And so to get started, I wanted to show you two more maps to get everybody oriented to the area. Probably many of you attending are from Churchill, but this shows the borough in context. You can see Churchill, is this shape, and then it's surrounded by Penn Hills, Wilkinsburg, Forest Hills, and Wilkins, with Monroeville off farther to this side and Pittsburgh off farther to that side. And just to orient you, this is the Parkway going through here, and the high school's here, Edgewood Country Club, the Beulah Presbyterian Church that, is a historic church. And then this outlined in purple is the C1 district that we're focusing on for this visioning project. And then here you can see a blow up of the C1 district, again with the, the major transportation arteries nearby. Here we have the Parkway East, Beulah Road, Greensburg Pike, and Lewin Lane is kind of tree covered down here, but it's under there somewhere. And it may interest you to know that when Westinghouse designed this site in the 1950s, they designed it to look like a locomotive engine from the air. Of course, Westinghouse Electric was, one of the biggest parts of Westinghouse, but Westinghouse also made air brakes for trains. Long before the days of Google Maps. And so I'd like to move on to panelist introductions, and I'm so excited for everybody to get this chance to meet these experts who are just a really amazing group of people. They work in transportation planning, and they either work in transportation planning or really understand Churchill's connective routes for driving, walking, and biking. And we're so honored that they volunteered to be with us this evening and share their expertise. So I'm going to introduce them. And I want you to know that longer bios for our panelists are posted on churchillborough.com, so you can read more. I've had to abridge them for time. Ken Balke, hi Ken. Is a longtime resident of Churchill Borough. He retired as a consulting engineer at Westinghouse Electric with 42 years of service that included 2 different stints at the Westinghouse R&D Center. He is an avid runner, walker, and cyclist, and thus he knows every route in the community. Professionally, Ken has held numerous positions in the nuclear industry, including developing nuclear engineering safety standards used by many industries. He earned bachelor's and master's degrees in mechanical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh, and currently serves as an adjunct faculty member in Pitt's nuclear engineering program. Eric Borough, hi Eric, is the advocacy director for Bike Pittsburgh, which is a 3,500 member bike and pedestrian advocacy organization in the Pittsburgh urban area. He works most closely with the city of Pittsburgh and other stakeholders to install on-street bike infrastructure, such as bike lanes and bike racks, as well as pushing for bike and walk-friendly policies and funding. He moved to Pittsburgh in 1995 to attend Pitt, and he fell in love with the bicycle while in college, and then that made him fall in love with Pittsburgh, and he's still here. Leanne Cheney. Hi, Leanne. Leanne is an active transportation planner at the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, called SPC. This is the Metropolitan Planning Organization serving the Pittsburgh, the greater Pittsburgh 10-county area. And Leanne previously served as the chief planner for Indiana County and then became the executive director for the Blairsville Community Development Authority. She works every day to help create safe, comfortable, and connected networks for people who bike and walk in communities across southwestern Pennsylvania. She has a bachelor's in regional planning and a master's in geography from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Bill Lesterick. Hi, Bill. Bill supervises the safety section in the traffic unit at PennDOT District 11 and is also the PennDOT District 11 Bicycle Pedestrian Coordinator. Now, the safety section performs traffic studies related to speed limits, stop signs, truck restrictions, etc. And the safety section also analyzes crash history to determine where improvements can be made to help reduce the severity of crashes and fatalities in our region. As the bike ped coordinator, Bill works with the many municipalities in our region, providing assistance with developing comprehensive plans and designing new facilities along state roadways. He has a BA in Civil Engineering Technology from Point Park. Ann Ogorek. Hi, Ann. Ann is the Assistant Director of Mobility and Transportation Initiatives at Allegheny County Economic Development, also called ACED, if I slip into acronyms. She provides planning and technical support to municipalities and community groups for transportation projects and helps to plan county transportation projects. She works closely with the local Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is where Leanne is, and also with PennDOT, which is where Bill is, on the planning and programming of state and federally funded transportation projects. In addition, she oversees the transportation element of Allegheny Places, which is the county's comprehensive plan, and Active Allegheny, which is the county's active transportation plan. She's also a board member of the Port Authority of Allegheny County Public Transit System. She has a bachelor's in public administration from Northern Iowa and a master's in city and regional planning from Ohio State. And her participation in on the board of the Port Authority links us to Amy Silverman. Hi, Amy. Amy is the Director of Planning at the Port Authority of Allegheny County, where she's worked since 2013. And her department oversees transit-oriented communities, station design, long-range, multimodal, and corridor planning for the agency. And her team also focuses on the key values so important in our communities and for the agency surrounding sustainability and equity. Amy has a master's in public policy and management from CMU, and she lives in Wilkinsburg with her husband and son, who might be getting tucked into bed soon. So I want to thank the panelists. It's a wonderful brain trust we have here, and I'm going to hand it over to Jim to ask some questions.
Thanks, Elaine. So the next section is a series of questions that we're going to ask the panelists to talk about, and I'll direct the questions to some of the panelists. And then at 8:10, we're going to take questions from the attendees. So use that Q&A button if you want to. And if Ms. O'Neill is on as an attendee this time, you're most welcome to make a statement for the owner at 8:10. We'll unmute your mic, and we would love to have you do that if that's something you're interested in doing for this webinar. Then we'll go with the lightning round at 8:25 and closing marks at 8:40, so we'll keep us right on track. So connectivity, that seems to me like a buzzword for planners. And so my question, I'm going to start with Ann, is what is this connectivity stuff about? Can you give us a more lay version of what it is we're trying to do with connectivity?
Well, I think it's just best to think about connectivity across all modes within the site and to the site. Something I'll mention in my remarks later on is connectivity is so critical because we want to make sure that the opportunities and benefits of economic development in our county are available to everyone. So we really want to think about how people are going to get to the site and move around the site and make sure it's done in the most convenient, direct way so that people can fully benefit from it.
Great, thank you, Anne. I'm going to ask the same question of Bill. Talk to me a little bit about what connectivity means for you.
I think Ian kind of said it best there in the beginning was, it's making sure that there's facilities for all users. You're trying to make sure that you're not excluding anybody from being able to get to different places and providing them an opportunity to, whether you're in a wheelchair, whether you're on a bicycle, whether you're a normal pedestrian or, even those in cars, you want to make sure that you're providing the best type of facility that accommodates all users to wherever you're trying to get them to or through.
So let me ask a follow-up to both of you, whichever one wants to speak, Anne or Bill. But so now we're dealing with a C1 district in Churchill. That's a commercial district. We're not sure what that's going to be, but why is it important to be connected to a commercial district in the community? Either one of you.
Presumably that, I guess there's a chance it could be residential in the future, but connectivity to a commercial district is jobs and could be education or training. So that's really like the lifeblood of, economic development. So from the county economic development standpoint, we really want people to be able to benefit from any new investment in the county.
Great, thank you very much. Bill, do you want to add? I keep making you follow Anne.
No, I mean, it's really important because depending on what goes into that site and depending on who is working there, you really want to be able to try and get and attract, people to that site. I mean, it's especially in some of the younger generation, they're really looking at, being nearby and what's easy ways to get there and, maybe not driving and, can I take a bus to one place and maybe hop on my bike and get to the rest? And so, having connectivity to a large commercial business or whatever may go in there is very important for attracting jobs and job seekers and just ensuring that you have a very diverse workforce.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Amy, because we've been talking a lot about walking and riding to it, but in terms of the public connection of the Port Authority, how can connectivity be improved with the development of this site? Not specifically, but in general, I'm still thinking in terms of what connectivity is and why that is important.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things about looping transit in here is the sort of what Anne was talking about with economic development. This is partially also about economic mobility and ensuring that people have access to opportunities so that they can sort of have mobility, not just physically, so to speak, but sort of within their lives and making sure that they have opportunities to grow and evolve with the lives that they choose to live. So I think that's, also including things like affordability is very important, and making sure that everything is accessible and seamless is all, really important concepts that we think about at a high level.
Great, thank you, Amy. And I'm going to ask Eric, and I'm not asking specifically unless you do know about the site, but in general, in our part of Western Pennsylvania, what are some barriers that we typically have for connectivity? What challenges do we have to deal with as we think about connecting this site to Churchill?
Yeah, good question. I think a big part of that is a lot of the Pittsburgh region is, you know, we've been around a long time. A lot of this, a lot of the development and a lot of, you know, private property issues, everything is built out. So we're often stuck in situations where we're retrofitting a lot of the, you know, infrastructure in and trying to squeeze things in, squeeze a sidewalk in here, squeeze a bus stop in there. And so I think a good approach is really like what I like to think of as like a fix it first approach, is going into a site knowing that you, with the, you know, the values that you have of trying to get people there from multiple starting point and then moving on from there.
Great, Eric. Would you just finish that? There was a little bit of a pause there, just the last statement.
Okay, yeah. I said I like to think of places as to approach development projects with a fix-it-first approach, where you show up with you know, values of, like, say a value would be making sure that everybody could get there without, you know, without a car, for instance, and then that will help you set, you know, what you'd like to accomplish with the project itself. I think it's important to recognize that a large percentage of people in Allegheny County don't have access to a car. I'm not sure what the county figures are, but in the city, about a quarter of city households don't even have access to a car. So, you know, we don't want to eliminate, you know, potential workers and talent and whatnot from going to a site.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to ask Ken, as our resident on the panel, what's your sense of what connectivity means to you as part of this C1 site in Churchill?
Obviously, being a resident that lives less than a quarter mile from the site, when I hear the word, it's for the residents that live here. I'll set the workers aside separate. And I'm going to borrow a comment that was made in panel 1 by an architect who lives here in Churchill as well. And he brought up the point that when the borough was established, most of the homes were built here about 60 years ago. It was a suburban community, no sidewalks. Very few streets have sidewalks in our borough. And I like Eric's comment about the retrofitting, because let's take biking first. Biking is, on many of our streets, is just plain right dangerous, because you're mixing cars and bicycles real close together. You really don't have any defined bike lanes at this point. And not saying it couldn't be adjusted, such a Greensburg Pike would be more, it's a wider road with 4 lanes. You may be able to do some things there. And so on the biking, there's some real challenges if you say, hey, we can start biking around this area that's being developed or into it. If you put bike lanes in it, a lot of work would have to be done to make it possible for residents or outside visitors to buy, like somebody even wants to come into work. Some retrofitting would have to be done to get them to the site itself from that. And let's take walking from a connectivity standpoint. There's 4 roads that border the property. If I start from the south, let's see, the southeast side of it, Lewin Lane goes up along the southern end of the property. Spectacular area. It's very green. The southern part of the property is forested and land, a lot of wildlife. And then when you come over to the west side of the property, you use Greensburg Pike. Now there's a nice sidewalk on Greensburg Pike. Then on the other side, it's bordered by the Parkway, but if I'm running or walking, I then have to get on Penn Avenue. And Penn Avenue, I try not to do it too much, because the cars are coming by at 35 miles an hour and you're standing, your sidewalk is right next to that heavy traffic. And then finally, Beulah Road borders the eastern side of the property. It sits well below the property, has about a 50 or 60 foot wall, I wouldn't say wall, or steep embankment above Beulah Road. And I generally don't run Beulah Road because there's so much traffic on it, but I do use Old Beulah, which is adjoining to it, which is very pleasant. So I'm thinking of connectivity right now, because of that site, for the 70 years that it's existed, my area in Royal Oak, we're separated from the people over in the other side on Greensburg Pike. and we're separated by people in Blackridge. It's not easy to walk within my community is easy, but to walk in my community to another part is very hard. If the site was opened up, if the owners were willing to open up the part of the site, you could now really make some greater connectivity across neighborhoods in the borough itself. And
Great. Thank you.
Employees too.
Thank you, Ken. That's a great point, and that's why I was hoping you would share that as a resident. I'm going to switch now to Bill and Ann. We don't know what type of development might occur in the future in the C1 district, but let's imagine a spectrum of possibilities ranging from residential to mixed uses to research and development labs and offices to manufacturing to warehouse distribution. Bill and Ann, as transportation planners, can you help citizens picture different scenarios for their community in the future for the various types of redevelopment, or what additional infrastructure would be needed to put into place? So I think I put the comma in the wrong place, but for various kinds of redevelopment scenarios, what kinds of additional infrastructure would need to be put into place? And so I open that up to Ann or Bill.
Yeah, I think we'll probably get into the nitty-gritty of all the different types of transportation elements that can be added to the site, but you could picture if it was residential, you'd have a network of streets. And again, I'll show my bias when I say sidewalks all the time, but you could imagine streets, residential streets with sidewalks, maybe bike lanes, but great element would be shared use paths that could provide some of that connectivity that Ken was just mentioning. And it was something I noticed too when I looked at the map, as well as, transit stops. If you were looking at more of like a mixed use development, additionally, you may need streets that have on-street parking, again, bike parking, wider sidewalks for more activity levels, transit stops, and maybe even some structured parking to allow for some more of that traffic. And then for other uses like office or manufacturing distribution, you could envision maybe a smaller network of roads to get vehicles in and out to serve the main buildings. But I'd also promote the idea of shared use paths and sidewalks through those types of developments as well. A lot of employees and staff would use those on their breaks or before or after work. So those were the types of things I was thinking of on site. And I think Bill was going to help us imagine what could happen off site.
Yeah, and so I did spend some time, a lot of my years at PennDOT in our highway occupancy permits unit. So, I dealt with a lot of these kind of, maybe not such a large site, but things like the cracker plant and other stuff that have had some major impacts on roadways. And what you can really see is it really depends on what's coming in. And there's a lot of things that kind of lead up to that. Everything kind of starts off with the scoping, and then you kind of start having to do traffic studies to determine what improvements could be needed to handle traffic to there. With such a large site, you could be looking at turn lanes just off of some of the main arteries going around there. Ideally, hopefully nothing off the parkway. We don't want really, that's always a difficult thing to do because you have to do almost a big point of access study, and those are quite a handful to get through. But you could definitely see many roadway improvements, and depending on how much traffic could be generated by the site could cause you to have to add lanes, potential modification of what facilities are around there. If you can maybe take something like Greensburg Pike and maybe do a road diet on something like that, there's kind of a road diet works a couple different ways. There's make them fat or make them skinny, and make them fat, you add a lane, and maybe you add some area for bicyclists as well. And if you make them skinny, maybe you take away a lane. But there's a lot of traffic analysis that has to be done to really show what would be needed around there. But you could definitely look at, for such a large site, there's definitely probably going to be something needed. It's just a lot of analysis at many intersections nearby. The Penn Highway intersection, right where it intersects with Beulah Road, the Beulah Road, wherever any entrance might be for the site, you have to analyze those and see what kind of improvements would be needed.
Thank you, Bill.
I could add one more thing on from Ann's comments, and that is just because it's sort of new in the planning realm, at least here in the Pittsburgh region, which is thinking about transit operations in advance of building out larger sites. So we have started to have those conversations. For example, at the Hazelwood Green site had transit coming to it really before much build out of that site was complete at all. And so it's a trickier conversation. It's hard for us to put in transit service where there aren't people, but it's also hard for a developer to build out the type of infrastructure, or for PennDOT to build the type of infrastructure that they need without sort of projecting how many people might take transit to a site. So it is really important for us to think about how transit might come to a site, what type of development it is, might attract different types of transit from different places, whether it's, you know, more white collar jobs or blue collar jobs, or, you know, shift work, overnight work, et cetera. And so we are really starting to get into a space where we can start to plan for some of those things and cost out different scenarios. And that actually might end up being something that can help us shift infrastructure discussions too. Maybe it means that, you know, an on and off ramp aren't needed because we really think we're going to get enough of sort of a mode shift to use transit, and not 100% of the people heading to the site are going to need to drive their own car, for example.
Yep, thank you. I was going to mention that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. The next one is for both Amy, and we're going to just continue on with this thought, Amy and Eric. So when the site is developed, it could be 24 hours a day, or it could be just from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. We just don't know until we see what the development's going to be. But how do we provide mobility for workers throughout the day? What are the critical elements we need to have for providing workers? It's for Amy or Eric.
I can start. So for transit, you know, one of the most important things for us to think about is the span of service. So that's the earliest trip in the morning to the latest trip in the evening. That very much is dependent on what type of activities are happening in a development. For example, we've had large sort of warehouse type sites where we've actually been able to specifically change times of bus schedules to accommodate a shift entering or exiting a facility because it's the bulk of the ridership on that route, for example. But it's also really important to think about transit frequency when we're talking about different times of the day, even if it's shift work and it's very predictable known times that people are entering and exiting. You know, family members get sick, emergencies happen in the middle of the day, or the middle of the night. We always want to have sort of that backup option that someone knows they don't have to sit outside and wait for an hour for a bus to take them home or somewhere else if they need to get there. So I think frequency and span are both really important from the transit perspective.
Thanks, Amy. Eric.
Yeah, from the biking and walking perspective, I mean, the number one thing in my mind is the sense of safety. And that can take on a variety of different, you know, people define safety in different ways. And so, you know, safety can be defined such as, you know, it's safe to walk or bike there without cars, you know, it's designed in such a way that cars aren't speeding through there. Another aspect of that, especially if people are, you know, if there's nighttime workers, is making sure that there's lighting and just basic things like that. Also, just even thinking through where the sidewalk is located. You know, is it next to a building or is it out, like wide out in the open? And, you know, where everybody, from the surrounding area can see you. So you might not feel as safe walking along that corridor. So just really being conscientious and thinking through, you know, all of those elements and what it would actually feel like to be in that space. I think it's really important just to bring yourself down to the human level and really think through what that's like.
Terrific, thank you.
One more thing to
Go ahead, Amy.
Safety comments. I knew he was going to talk about them, which is why I let him talk about that first. It's obviously important for transit as well, as people are often waiting at night. But another really interesting thing about some of these larger developments is thinking about the density, and you know, the more people and the more activity you have, activating spaces at nighttime, whether it's people walking their dogs or people popping in and out of shops or bars or restaurants or other things like that, really also help with that sense of safety. So it's not just, again, about the physical infrastructure, but about the density and the activity. You know, the more people feel like they are seen, the safer they can feel.
Great, thank you. Before I ask Leanne a question, I just might mention to attendees that we are, hopefully some of this discussion will prompt a question. I see one that came up, but please feel free to use the Q&A button at the taskbar at the bottom, or at least it's the bottom of mine, might be at the top of your computer, to ask any questions of the panelists. So, and we'll get to those in a little bit. So in terms of Leanne, I just wonder, this is the federal and state departments of transportation, SPC, and Allegheny County are all placing a priority on planning for multimodal or all modes of transportation. Why is that? And why are all these agencies encouraging walking, biking routes and transit connections to be part of a plan, or maybe like a development in the C1 district?
Well, to start with, I would say that creating a more complete, connected, and well-balanced transportation system improves mobility for all users, whether they drive, walk, ride a bike, or take the bus. So that's one of the reasons for placing a priority on multimodal transportation. And you could get into more detail on that. How does it help? How does it benefit all users? Walking and biking networks play a role in reducing traffic congestion by enabling people to replace short driving trips with biking and walking or transit. It also helps reduce bicycle and pedestrian injuries and deaths. And walking and biking networks also play a role in greenhouse gas reductions and are relatively inexpensive compared to highway investment.
Great, thank you. Amy, can you define, because people, oh, we lost Amy.
Oh.
Must be time to go put the youngster to bed. So Anne, maybe you could talk a little bit about what transit-oriented development is and how that affects these kinds of developments and connectivity.
Yeah, and I'll refer the audience to Port Authority's transit-oriented development guidelines, which would be on their website because they do a great job of describing it. But it's basically a system of design and elements that you include in developments that really foster multimodalism and access to transit. So situating or orienting your buildings closer to the street, so that people have things that they can walk or bike to as they're on their way to transit. Adding multi-unit apartments or condos or a mix of density of housing so that more people can walk to transit, walk or bike again, and be able to make use of that versus needing to have a car for all the trips. So it's a mix of density, street elements like bike lanes, on-street parkings, wide sidewalks, and great facilities for transit.
Great, thank you. Elaine.
Speaking of travel modes, this might be a good time to draw our audience in for a second with a poll. So we'd like to ask people who are attending the webinar, what modes interest you the most? The question is, what transportation facilities would you most like to see prioritized in the build out of this location to encourage people to travel to and from it in ways that best support the community? We'll keep it up it's been open for 30 seconds. We'll keep it up for another few. People are still voting. Oh yeah, those votes are coming in. Okay, that was a minute. So let's see what we have. Okay, that's interesting. It looks like of the modes that people would prioritize, it looks like, oh, can you see that? You can't see it yet. Can you see it now? Okay, so sidewalks and trails seem to have the preponderance of responses. People think that's the priority. And transit and transit service connections are also a high priority, it seems. And I wondered if, let's see, Amy and might want to get back to talking about transit service and connections. And Jim, what was your question going to be for her about multimodal development or transit-oriented development?
Well, I think Ann did a pretty nice job
That's true.
of it.
Ann already did that.
Hopefully Amy didn't hear my answer, because I'm sure she would have done a better job. But
Amy, I know you didn't hear what Ann said, but she talked about I was wondering about what transit-oriented development was, and she was talking about the guidelines that have been developed by your agency.
Yeah.
I was going to add to that.
Sure. So I apologize. I needed to step away. My toddler is being difficult and my husband is working tonight. But yes, so Port Authority has transit-oriented development guidelines. When we talk about TOD, we are talking about development that is dense, mixed use, walkable, and close to high quality transit. That's sort of our definition for that. So high quality transit, meaning transit that's frequent and reliable and some level of speedy. That doesn't necessarily need to mean rapid, but not slow. And with safe and accessible amenities such as shelters and stops. So, I think an important thing to say as well is that not every development is going to be dense and mixed use. That's just not possible for all the development types that occur in the world. So there is also sort of this concept of transit adjacent development too. So that might be a development that isn't necessarily mixed use or isn't really dense, but that is capitalizing on nearby transit or helping to encourage a sort of adjacent, uses to get people to come to and from a site via transit. So obviously we would all love all of our communities to be these nice, dense, mixed use, walkable, beautiful places. But it is, important to note that those come in different forms depending on the use and the context.
Great. Ann, I'd like to turn back to you. What does the county say about connectivity to development sites, especially commercial sites?
Thanks. I always like to connect our municipal initiatives to county plans and initiatives. And so, as many of you know, in most parts of the county does not have land use control. So we don't have zoning or subdivision and land development regulatory powers. So we can't really dictate how municipalities develop. However, through our comprehensive plan, we provide an overall vision of land use development. And then we provide some resources and best practices and even funding to encourage municipalities to develop in that way. So what's great about this project is that it's really consistent with the themes of Allegheny Places, the comp plan. One of the overriding themes of Allegheny Places is the importance of redeveloping our existing places rather than developing new greenfield sites. So the plan doesn't necessarily dictate exactly how a site is developed. We give broad principles that we would like to see as a part of that development. So for example, efficiently connecting all people to jobs, schools, and activities, supporting mobility of existing communities, providing efficient access to new development, and encouraging multimodal connectivity. So that's one way the county, can kind of share our thoughts about how we would like redevelopment to take place.
Thank you. So this question is I'm going to start with Leanne. How do we promote non-driving modes of access especially to maybe a new large development, like might happen at the C1 district?
Well, Jim, I guess if you're asking how do we promote it to the developers or how do we promote use of it if it's included in the development?
Your choice.
All right, I'm going to take the second one. And that would be, I think, first of all, by designing it in a manner that was safe, connected, and comfortable, would, in and of itself, that would promote use of it. And also raising awareness of the facilities being there, wayfinding signage, things like that. I guess to go back to how would you promote it to the developer, because I didn't think about that perspective. I think a lot of the developers already are aware of the benefits of biking and walking and providing facilities for that, but you could also reiterate that and share the benefits that we know are out there, like other panelists said this evening. The benefits, like I think Bill talked about it, retaining employees, attracting residents, things like that.
Awesome, thank you. Eric, the same question. How can we promote non-driving modes of access to new large developments?
Yeah, see, I read it the first way. How do we promote it to the developers? I think partly because of my experience of working with a lot of developers, mostly in the Pittsburgh area, is really like the ones that I think have come up with better developments that are more inclusive to people are the ones where you know, the developers were very open to talking with residents. And you know, a lot of times, because there are developments that show up that, you know, maybe aren't as you know, multimodal or aren't as welcoming to like to all types of modes. And so setting that expectation early with developers that you want to have that conversation with them, I think is really important. I've seen that play out both ways, where, you know, developers come in with an idea and then they're like, it's our land, we're going to do what we want to it. And then there's no back and forth with the community about how this development can improve their community. And then I've seen it the other direction where developers show up and they're like, we want to get the best development we can. You know, let's talk. And so like that, how you can encourage that, you know, the second type to encourage conversation, I think is really important. And then you see that, you see that play out like all the time with developments around the city. And, you know, just with that in mind, it's also important to think through how those connections, you know, are connected to, you know, other amenities, not just in your own neighborhood and not just in your own municipality.
Great, and finally, I'm going to ask Amy the same question, which is how can we promote non-driving modes of access? This should be near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, to not repeat things that are already said, I'll go a slightly different direction, which is thinking about sort of how we promote accessing after the development is there. So, or in sort of the building out of said development. So I think that's really about the infrastructure that we've already been talking about, making sure there are safe and accessible pathways for walking, biking, making sure there are amenities for transit. That might mean something specific like a layover facility for buses, or rerouting buses in certain ways, and making physical changes to allow that to happen easily and safely so that people, you know, get on and off in logical places. And I think there's something to be said for sort of the ongoing encouragement from the developer too. So developers that provide their employees, if it's an employer, providing those employees with you know, some sort of cost offset or purchasing of, you know, if they don't drive their car to work, maybe they get a certain amount of money to put towards biking, or maybe they're purchasing transit passes to, or offsetting the cost of those transit passes for their employees. So, or offering paid parking. I mean, free parking is, you know, kind of the easiest way to make sure that everyone drives to your site. So, you know, thinking about other things like that a developer can do long-term to really continue to encourage people to not drive to the site if they do have another alternative.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. So this question is for Leanne and Eric. Can you give us an example of another place where a large site was developed in a community or is under development? Obviously, we're thinking in terms of the 133-acre site here under the C1 district. Is that example where there are ways that redevelopment incorporated walking, biking, transit connections, both within the site and extending outward to the community? So are there examples that people can learn from?
I guess I'll go first. I see I'm unmuted. The first thing that comes to mind for me is actually, I think a combination of both, and interestingly enough, they're right next to each other. I think an example of a really well thought out new development is, which was mentioned earlier, was Hazelwood Green. They approached that site with, we want to figure out how to get people to the site, in all different types of modes, and we can't, we just physically can't fit all the cars in here. And so let's try to figure out how to do this. And like Amy said earlier, incorporated transit into it early. If you've been down there, it's pretty remarkable. It's only part of it's built out, but there's a bike path throughout the whole thing, and on every street. There's sidewalks all connected through everywhere. And then right down the street, you kind of have an older development, the Pittsburgh Technology Center, which is kind of the opposite, where it's very car oriented. It's hard to get there, with transit. If you want to bike there or walk there, it's kind of a pain in the neck. Like the transit stop there's only one, and the site is so large, and it just takes a while to get around. And it's just not really like a human level, when that was thought through. I mean, that was in the early 2000s. A lot's changed since then. But I just like to use those two examples because they're right next to each other, and kind of like you can see the pros and cons of each style of development right there.
Thank you. Leanne.
Yes, this isn't, it's local and it's more in a rural area, but in Indiana County, in White Township, Indiana, PA, the county developed the Windy Ridge Business and Technology Park along Route 286. That's a very large site, and they're offering parcels from 5 to 20 acres in size. And Urban Outfitters recently built a distribution center there. But what they did was incorporated development of walking trails throughout the whole parcel, the entire site. There is transit access, but again, it's not as frequent as we would have in a more urban area. And then supporting things that were done, and Bill, you might be able to speak more to this. Well, you're District 11 though, but Route 422 interchange was improved to support this corridor, which is important to this business site. And then more recently, following the 422 interchange improvements, is an improvement to the Route 286 corridor, which will include new sidewalks, crosswalks, ADA compliant bike lanes, and the local officials and community leaders there believe that corridor is key to the success of building that site up.
Great, thank you, Leanne.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting close to 8:10. So what we'd like to do is suspend the questions for a few minutes. Those of you that are attending, please feel free to continue to send some questions in. We have some great questions from attendees, and we'd like to address them with the panelists. But before we do that, is Ms. O'Neill available? Can we unmute her? Ms. O'Neill, would you like to make a statement, please?
Yes, just briefly, thank you. My name is Rachel O'Neill. I'm an attorney at Reed Smith LLP in Pittsburgh, and we represent the property owner Churchill Crossings. Earlier at the first visioning workshop, I read a statement on behalf of the property owner, and I just want to reiterate our objection to this process because we haven't been meaningfully engaged and weren't consulted prior to this process. But I understand that you're on a tight schedule, and I'll just reiterate that objection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we would like to suggest that we would take the written document that you're providing us from the first website, and we'll include that as for the webinar as well.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is ask the panelists some of these questions that people are coming, and is that Keely that's going to do that, or? Yes, that's a nod, so that must be a yes. If you would unmute, Keely, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. So the first question is directed at both kind of Anne and Amy. And the question is, given the county's obligation to affirmatively further fair housing and the role transportation plays in this, what review of any development plan would the county do to ensure they are meeting their federally funded obligations? Will they do a transportation analysis for the impact on concentration of race and poverty? Just your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. We have, in our department in economic development, we have a whole housing division that would be the entity that has to comply with those fair housing rules and regulations. I'm not totally familiar with that aspect of things, but I do know that as a recipient of the federal housing dollars, we every year or two, we put together what's called the Impediments to Fair Housing report, where they do a comprehensive assessment of the availability and the location of affordable housing, and they map it and compare it to where transportation routes are and where job opportunities are. So I know that this site would be included in that. I'll call it semi-annual. I'm not sure how frequently it is, but in that assessment. And if it was off cycle and there was the opportunity maybe as a part of this project to do maybe just a one-off assessment, I think we could definitely inquire about that.
Great, thank you. Amy.
Yeah, so it's not directly related to Port Authority, but I think there are probably two pieces that are of interest here. One is that Port Authority very much advocates for affordable housing being brought close to transit as opposed to the other way around. So we are very much interested in looking and helping and advocating for our partners to locate affordable housing near frequent transit that already exists. It's much easier to deal with that way than trying to, get a bus route out to somewhere that, could someday be cut because of low volumes. We don't want that. We want people who need affordable housing also need frequent transit and need to be able to rely on it forever. The other piece to that is Port Authority does have sort of its own federal guidelines around providing service to low-income people. Is protected under Title VI. Which is part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So it's actually also about minority race persons as well. And that has to deal with how we make major changes to our transit service. So anytime we do make a major change, such as adding a new bus route, we do have to look at how those changes affect different demographics. And we do have to show that we aren't disproportionately burdening minority race populations or low-income populations in those analyses.
Great, thank you very much. Keely, do we have another question?
Yes, so the next question I think is directed more towards Bill, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but they're asking how difficult would it be to help restructure that area, as in our site, to aid traffic flow?
Boy, I wish that was an easy one to answer. Yeah. I mean, anytime you're looking at traffic and traffic flow and things like that, there is a lot of analysis that goes into it. I mean, you have to look at signals, the existing signals, proposed traffic, future conditions. So, I mean, that's one that you really can't answer. I'll be honest with you. I wish I had a better answer than that, but it's something that can be kind of looked at in conjunction with the township to see what's going on out there if there's something specific. But overall, you know, it's whenever you're talking about modifying a whole corridor, it takes a lot of work and a lot of analysis to do so.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions, Keely?
Yes, so we have one more, and this is about public transit. How would a community like ours get more public transit service? And how can we increase public transit without increasing air pollution?
Great question. So just making a note so that I answer both. So increasing transit and then air pollution. So the first piece about increasing transit is obviously a tough question right now, I think, in our current situations. I'm sure as we move forward, funding structures are going to change, probably for the short to medium term at least, probably for all public entities, but certainly Port Authority. So, you know, traditionally and historically, you know, transit service, Port Authority evaluates all requests that come in to change transit service every year. They're categorized into small changes and major changes. The major ones have to go through a transparent data-driven process. We publish a report every year with all the ideas that anyone and their mother have given us. And they are evaluated on efficiency, equity, and effectiveness. And there's a whole report that talks about the different metrics that go into that. Smaller changes or tweaks, you know, when we think about this site in particular, the transit is north of 376. This site is just on the other side of that. That's a very, you know, sort of small tweak, so to say, if we were to move a bus route, you know, from one block to another block. Those types of changes don't go through a formal process, and we are always looking for things like permanent infrastructure that supports both our operators, so things like restroom facilities if it's a break area, and our riders, so things like park and rides, things like bus stops that have amenities and infrastructure to support waiting passengers. So those smaller tweaks, I think, are very much something that we are open to, and I know are already sort of informally in discussions with around this site. You know, what could we do if there was sort of a traffic generator in this location again? With nothing there now, there isn't really a need for us to be on Beulah south of the highway, but certainly if there was a large traffic generator that, and when I say traffic, I mean trips, trip generator, you know, something that people were going to and from, we would, I'm sure, want to be closer to the site. We like to sort of be in as dense places as we can so we can serve as many people as possible. And then the air pollution piece, I think, is multifaceted. Certainly public transit is, you know, better for the environment than single occupancy vehicles are, but it is not perfect. You know, it's not as good as biking and walking is by any means, but technology is changing really rapidly. Our buses are about 92% cleaner than they were even just a couple of decades ago. With clean diesel technology. And then we are now operating our first battery electric buses. There are 2 of them. They're on the 88 Penn Avenue route, which is in the city of Pittsburgh, I think entirely that route. And we have, I believe, 8 additional battery electric buses that we have secured funding for, and we are continuing to put in lots of grants for more. So they are sort of zero local emission buses, and then you start to think about, you know, how is that electricity generated, and thinking about offsetting that at the source. So lots of ways that we can make our sort of hyper-local air quality, but also our regional air quality much better with transit.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions, Keely?
Yes, we had another one come up. If there is a major development that could bring large traffic, how feasible is it to get a direct freeway access, or how best would it be handled so that the traffic does not have to go into the smaller street infrastructure?
So that's for Bill.
Yeah, I think that one's for me again. So, you know, kind of what I was saying before, it's a difficult thing to answer because anytime you start talking about the interstate, you start talking about things like limited access right away. Those aren't as simple to just tie like a driveway into on many of our other state routes that just have regular right of way. Anytime that you touch an interstate or you're looking to do any kind of access from the interstate, there's something called a point of access study that has to be done. It's similar to a traffic impact study, but the best way to describe it is a traffic impact study on steroids. So you have to show that a lot of benefit to adding the ramps and things like that, without knowing what's going in there, and being that the site hasn't had an official kind of going forward, it's really difficult to speak on those kind of things, being that you don't really know what's going there yet to say, does it need this and does it need that? And, but, anytime that there's any kind of redevelopment of locations, you always have to kind of account for what's coming in. And if that's something that is desired or they want to look at, then, those are the types of things that they have to do to show if it can be done and if it works and if it can meet the requirements of that type of study.
Bill, I have a follow-up question to that. You've mentioned different kinds of studies and, traffic, there's the safety and the different traffic. Well, I think you mentioned 3 different kinds. And I just wonder who pays for those. I remember earlier on, I heard a citizen in Churchill ask, if new infrastructure is put in, first of all, who pays for the traffic studies, and then who pays for the infrastructure to be added, and then who pays for ongoing maintenance of the new facilities? And I don't know if a lot of people know that.
So I guess it depends, because there's different ways that things go in. If something comes in straight up as a highway occupancy permit, now whenever there's something called a highway occupancy permit, it's something that's initiated by a developer. There's a whole process that goes into that, and we just don't have the time to go through everything. But the short version of an HOP is pretty much everything follows the developer from design to build. It's through the design process, the studies, anything related to the HOP is pretty much on the developer to do for the construction. Now, depending on what goes in, then responsibilities start falling out elsewhere. If it's roadway improvements, if it's an added lane, then we'll eventually take over maintenance of that lane. If it's sidewalk falls to the municipality. PennDOT can't own and maintain sidewalks, so sidewalk falls to the municipality, and depending on their ordinances, it can fall down to the property owners where that sidewalk may border. Bike lanes are owned by the municipality if it's non-separated. So if you don't have anything in between, just paint. PennDOT maintains the roadway portion of it, but all the paint, the markings, any signage associated with that's all owned by the municipality. There's a lot of things that go into it. Now, there's other forms that they can do. There's other forms of funding depending on what they're doing. There's multimodal grants that has federal funding in it where, that can kind of offset some things, or depending if we have a project, sometimes there will be partnering done to try and incorporate some of those things, like has gone on some of the other projects out in our regions. So, there's a lot of things that go into it. It just kind of depends on how that project is developed and what type of funding they have to go along with it.
Great, thank you, Bill. We're right about where we need to be to start with what's called our lightning round. It's kind of a fun part of the session. So what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists to share with us a word or several words or a phrase that captures what you think is most important about this topic of connectivity. So we're going to have someone record that on a whiteboard. So as you may have to slow down a little bit if we need to get that included. But what I'd like to do is have you help us identify key words that summarize or best illustrate the ideas we've discussed as it relates to connectivity. And I'm going to go down through the list here that I have and start with Amy. Amy, what what one or two or a few words or a phrase should we take away from this discussion about connectivity?
I'll just say one, so I save some for others. I'm going to say accessible.
And what do you mean by accessible? Because that could mean all kinds of things.
I specifically chose that because it has a few different great meanings. I think one is sort of this broader concept of access, so not necessarily the physical access, but are you able to get somewhere, right? That could mean there's a bus route. That could mean there's a curb cut if you're in a wheelchair. So certainly accessible also means for people of all abilities. So from a sort of ADA perspective, we want everything to be accessible. It's often very much a challenge for us in Pittsburgh. So I'll leave it at those two definitions.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Anne. I'm going alphabetical with first names. So Anne.
Okay. I'll just give one too, and then if we can come back, I have more.
We've gone through lots. We're going around it several times.
Okay, good. Okay. I would say direct. So, and I'm thinking of all multimodal users here that, especially like someone who's walking or biking, that we provide the connections in a way that they get there efficiently and not like spending crazy amounts of time going out of their way to get. So direct. I'll just say it, direct.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you, Anne. Bill. You unmute, Bill?
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry. I would say, being accountable in what you're doing and having accountability to make sure that what you're trying to do is accounting for all types of users that may be accessing or trying to get to your location there.
Thank you. Eric.
It's kind of a riff on what's been said, but I think the word that I thought of was complete streets. So kind of the same thing, which is, taking a fix-it-first approach, like I mentioned earlier, and thinking through all potential users of a site before you make decisions on what the design is going to look like. So thinking through everything from biking, walking, to transit, to deliveries, to bigger picture, like is there a trail network nearby, etc.
Terrific. Thank you. Ken, what's one or two or three words that are important?
I thought Eric was going to take it, but I'm going to use Eric's word, and that's interface. And right
Tell us
now,
what you mean by that.
I'm sitting here as a very concerned citizen from what I've learned here tonight. In that, I was on both panels. I listened in on the first panel and the second. Right now, there's not an interface between the owner and my borough council. And man, there's no interface there. And if I listen to what Eric had to say, that where the interface occurs, where the owner's open to work with the interface with the residents, you end up with a good situation, which he indicated with like the Hazelwood Green project. And with us not having that interface, I'm sitting here concerned that if this is done the wrong way, property values drop. And all the conversation tonight too was about people coming into work. And I'm sitting here as a resident, my fellow residents I talked to this afternoon, our aspect is connectivity. Like is there a coffee shop? Can we walk up to it? Right now you could not. It'd be difficult to walk in from a safety standpoint. So I'm very concerned on this interface or lack of it.
Right. I just would caution you that you've heard one perspective from the owner on that, and that just be aware of that. Leanne.
Okay.
We have Leanne. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I thought you said Ian.
No, Leanne.
Yeah. And just a word or two. Well, I would say an umbrella term for me would be community connectivity is paramount. And then achieving that by improving mobility and physical connectivity.
Great. Thank you. We're back to Amy.
I will add safe. So I think that means physical safety. So are there protected pedestrian and bicycle facilities in particular? It sounds like I'm actually not super familiar with Beulah Road, but it sounds like it's not a great place to be as a pedestrian. And personal safety. So thinking about, nighttime activity and other things like that.
Thank you. Anne?
I would say coordinated. So the modes coordinated and the operations of the modes are coordinated.
So can you explain that a little more so I understand what that means?
Well, if you're going to make improvements to traffic signals in the vicinity of the site, are they coordinated, in the vicinity with other traffic signals, and or could they be coordinated with Port Authority traffic signal, transit signal priority, those types of things.
Good, thank you. Bill?
I'm going to go with convenience. So making sure that the site is able to be accessed easily and, that it's convenient to do. A lot of things is whenever you're talking about increasing some of the connectivity and pedestrian and biking is having good routes that are convenient that help promote that.
Thank you. Eric?
I'm going to go with equity on this one, and recognizing that not everybody, there's no cookie cutter solution to everybody's, individual needs. And so, casting a wide net and making sure that, things are accessible for all types of people, regardless of your background, your income, your mobility, etc.
Thank you, Eric. Ken, another phrase or thing that you would like to share about connectivity?
Yes, open access. Right now, there's only one way in and out of the site. That's through the Beulah connection. And I don't know if the folks on the panel are aware that there's a huge connection already from Greensburg Pike that you could use as a bus location as well. So you could stay away from that heavy Beulah and the Parkway, Beulah and Penn Avenue connection. And even on the southern routes, there's already an access off of Lewin Lane to the beautiful property that's on the southern side. Because if you open the access, now you've just made the site way more accessible for people to walk or bike to get up if there's something like a coffee shop or a restaurant for the residents nearby, and even for the workers to be able to get in and out. And right now there's no open access and never has been, except for the Greensburg Pike connection.
Absolutely, and there's a high school right there too, so that's important.
That's correct. Right at the Greensburg Pike, the high school's right across the street.
Great, thank you, Ken. Leanne, another one.
Network. I think it's important to not just have like a piecemeal development of things, but a community-wide network that might be comprised of more than one type of facility.
Network. Alrighty.
Connected network.
Yes. We're back to you, Amy. Have we exhausted your ideas?
No.
Oh, good.
I'll add, and I think I think you guys have another session on this maybe next week, but I'll add human scale. And so thinking about sort of the form that this development might take, I think it kind of has to do with the open access comment. But having this development, which is a very large site, but surrounded, to my knowledge anyway, mostly by single family homes with the exception of the school, really feel like it's part of a neighborhood and not feel like this giant monolith or something similar. So really bringing that down to a human scale. And that doesn't necessarily mean that something that was inside a monolith couldn't still be there. But when you think about the form and the design and what that looks like when you're on the street or on the sidewalk, I think that really can transform the community feel of the space.
Thank you very much. Well said. Anne, anything?
Options.
What do you mean by options?
Just in the, as the site concepts are determined or developed, that we just always keep in mind the full range of options for modes and points of access and so forth.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Bill, do we have any more on your list?
Yeah, I came up with one more here.
Awesome.
Feasibility. So the feasibility of what you want to do out there is, while it's great to have these amazing ideas and, you really want to try and get all users there and you want to do that, there are constraints. I mean, not to sound like the bad guy or anything. It's just that you have a lot of constraints out there with, Ken was saying with the hillside on Beulah Road, and you have the Parkway right there, and some very high ADT routes. And so it's, while it's always good to really want to have as much as you can, it's always good to just keep in mind is what's feasible in the end and what can you actually get done.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Eric.
I'm going to go with one shot, meaning often a lot of times it's really expensive and hard to retrofit things like once something's in place. And so trying to figure out how to get it right early is really important. Because
you're only going to have one shot at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Ken, another one.
Sure. I'm going to borrow from one from the prior session because it fits here too, and that's uniqueness. Unique.
Ah.
The reason I say this to help the other panelists, Mike Moya in the other section said you could do like what's been done in some locations in Pittsburgh where the bulldozers come in, everything gets mowed down, throw up a bunch of houses, apartments, and it looks just like any other neighborhood, not just in Pittsburgh, but any other city in the United States. There's nothing unique about it at all. With this site here, and building off Eric's comment, if it's done right, this could be a very unique destination, not just for the eastern suburbs, but Pittsburgh and beyond. In other words, this mix of having the right commercial aspect while protecting the natural beauty that exists, particularly on the southern end of the property.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Well said. And Leanne.
I'm going to go with all ages and abilities. We've talked a lot about access for various abilities, but not so much on age, like the youth, and then the fact that we have an aging population. We need to think about connectivity for all ages.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to open it up to anyone else. I realize we'll have to unmute your mic, but anything else that we should add to the list?
I'm going to throw in social connectedness.
What does that mean, Leanne?
I think that means really building on a lot of things that are on the list, like the human scale, blending with community, that facilitates social connectedness.
Yes. Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm going to add transected. So, we were talking about some good things about the Hazelwood Green site, and something to keep in mind there is it was also sort of one big monolith parcel at one point, and it is now transected into smaller pieces. And so there is a public road running through the middle of it, which means a lot of different things about connectivity and what can operate there, and sort of the longevity and the maintenance of those facilities, and not leaving it all to a developer. So I think something similar might be desirable to think about in this situation. So not only do we want, maybe nice sidewalks around the edge of this giant property, but it'd be really great if there were some things going through the center of it too that were for public use.
Thank you. Excellent. How about anybody else?
It's environmentally acceptable. I'm looking for a better word than acceptable. In other words, you have this natural beauty that already exists on the property, and whatever you do, whether it's the connectivity and how you get people in there, you still want to maintain that beauty, the natural beauty that exists. So it's maintain the natural beauty of the area of the property.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So We're
There are a
almost done,
few.
so I wanted you to go ahead and you said there were some others.
Yeah, there are some of our participants listed a few more ideas in the Q&A. So I thought I'd read those so
Oh.
Keely can capture them.
Oh, wonderful.
One person said consensus.
Hmm.
So that could mean a lot of things, but move toward consensus toward for how things can be connected, perhaps. So Keely, would that be something? Consensus. Here's another one. It might be part of the connectivity that we mentioned before, but maybe connecting to other community assets. And there's that on the other side of the parkway is a greenway that, you know, where the former Churchill Country Club was. So connect with that. Seamless integration with neighborhoods. So that's another kind of connectedness. And then differentiation is one, and let's put that under unique up a bit, because it seems to me a little bit like that. How would you know, this be more attractive or interesting than any place else? Forward thinking. So maybe some progressive thinking about what future users, future community members, future people throughout Eastern Allegheny County might want. So forward thinking. And then maybe part of the uniqueness would be going back up to uniqueness. Is there some way to include some sort of homage to Westinghouse through the development of any of the site typology or facilities that are related maybe to connectivity, or maybe in other ways at the site as well, just as an homage to the site in development.
Thank you,
So those were
Elaine.
great ones. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, excellent. So I'd just like to thank the panelists. You guys rock. You're an amazing group of people, and the knowledge you bring to this discussion is very special. And I personally want to thank you very much for you taking the time to do this. I'd like to thank the attendees. We had just a little over 40 attendees at one point, and I think that's excellent. I'm really pleased with that kind of turnout as part of this discussion about a vision for the commercial development in the C1 district there in Churchill. So we have recorded this panel discussion along with the one earlier this evening, and we've recorded the whiteboard, so those whiteboards will be saved, and they'll be posted in several places, including the website for the borough. So anyone who wants to go back and look at those or look at the suggestions, those will be available to anyone. So don't lose sight of the fact that we have 4 more amazing panel discussions coming up. So on May 6th at 5:30, we're going to have one on living infrastructure and resource conservation. I know Ken started to talk a little bit about that, and that's a really important topic. Also on May 6th at 7:15 will be one on human well-being, and we have some very interesting panelists to discuss that. On May 13th at 5:30, we'll talk about design standards and form. We'll get into more than aspects of land use planning and design standards. And the second webinar on May 13th at 7:15, we'll start to talk about the market and how that influences what can be done in the C1 district in Churchill. So thank you so much for being part of this discussion, and I really appreciate everything you've done for this, and we look forward to those of you that can to join us on May 6th. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.